Hey everyone, welcome to the most opinionated space podcast on the internet,
Ad Astra, the podcast where we integrate space, policy, and technology.
I'm Jack.
And I'm Newton.
I have a Master's of Public Policy degree with a concentration in science and space policy.
And I'm a PhD in computer science and an all-around tech geek.
All right, don't forget to follow us on Twitter at @AdAstra_podcast, like us on Facebook, and subscribe to our mailing list on elemental.fm to get regular updates from the team. And if you like what you hear, give us a 5-star review on iTunes and recommend us on Overcast. So what are we talking about today?
Today, we're going to be talking about Infrastructure Week.
Yay! Infrastructure,
Yes.
Everyone's favorite topic.
Unlike everyone else who just joked about covering Infrastructure Week instead of James Comey, we're actually going to be talking about it in our latest from Washington segment. We'll also cover updates on Ted Cruz and the Outer Space Treaty, and a hearing on the American Space Commerce Free Enterprise Act of 2017. Latest from so we have a big latest from Washington section this week. For Space News Highlight of the Week, we'll highlight the folks who got the astronaut candidate positions over me, maybe because they can pronounce astronaut. In international news, we'll talk COPUOS in Vienna, the Indian Space Agency launching their biggest rocket yet, and China's space agency having some staffing changes. In Latest in Tech, we'll talk about fire in space and fire on Earth. And in our latest from Washington, we'll start to discuss AwesomeCon, as well as an announcement from NASA about an upcoming briefing on exoplanets. So, on to Infrastructure Week. So, Donald Trump made some serious news last week. I don't know if you heard. It was pretty serious.
Very serious. The most serious thing that he has ever done.
Yes, but on Monday, June 5th, the Trump administration announced and signed memos for 2 major plans. The first was to resolve the VA's medical records, basically to use the same system as DoD. I won't go too much into that because it's not space related, but they want to update the VA's medical records, something that we've been talking about doing for a while now. So good on them. And he also announced that he would be trying to change the future of air traffic control. Gasp. He called air traffic control outdated, made fun of radar and ground-based systems, and then presented his new idea. And the new idea is about privatizing the air traffic control segment, sector, specifically of the FAA. This is something that isn't necessarily a new idea. Talk of privatizing air traffic control dates back to 1987, where President Ronald Reagan's Commission on Privatization identified air traffic control as key candidate for outsourcing. And it's failed its way all the way into last year when the House Transportation Committee, they failed to back the idea under the Obama administration, but still a full Republican House. So the Trump administration is hoping for a different outcome this time around. The idea is that the idea that they're pushing is much like Canada, that a private nonprofit corporation would be created to operate, manage, and control air traffic control nationwide. The FAA would still have some oversight capacity, but a board made up mostly of representatives of the major airlines would govern this nonprofit corporation. Jack, what are some of your initial thoughts on that?
This just sounds like Amtrak in the air. It would be a government-sponsored corporation, as Amtrak is, with a board of directors, maybe not necessarily made up of, the major railway executives, but it has a board of directors. This doesn't seem like a completely new idea and seems like something that they've been trying to do for a while. I mean, you said even dating back to 1987, back in the old days, that they were trying to do this.
Yeah, I know. It's great.
But I think there's also a reason why it hasn't succeeded up until now. Like, there's people care a different amount about air traffic control than they do about railway control. I mean, it's probably just as likely that you're going to get into a train wreck as you are going to get into an aircraft wreck. But the public perception of an aircraft wreck is so much more intense, I think. There's more scrutiny around. I mean, geez, the Malaysia 370 flight, they've just closed the case, or at least CNN has, at least.
Right.
They just did that like a year ago, and that went missing in 2014?
Right.
Like there's this public perception around air traffic control that people don't like it not being in the hands of an accountable organization like the government. I mean, as accountable as government can be, or as accountable as it's perceived to not be, government's pretty accountable. I mean, they don't have a board of directors. They don't have stakeholders that aren't the American people. I mean, they like literally constitutionally have to have your best interests at heart. So I guess it'll be interesting to see whether this sinks or swims. I mean, this is like the major initiative.
This is.
I know Trump is all big on infrastructure, but like it's not going to be like a road project. It's not going to be a bridge project.
I'm sure
I'm
sure they have more coming. But you know what I'm really excited about? This is
what?
This is a legitimate political argument from the Trump administration. Like, just stop and think about it for a second.
It's only taken 140 days.
We're not arguing about banning an entire religion from the country or denying scientific consensus. We're having an argument about privatization in the first conservative thing that he's done probably since trying to ban an entire religion from the country.
Something's fishy here. Something doesn't smell right.
I'm so should I be this happy about what's probably not that great of an idea, but we're actually this is something we have a discussion about.
And there will be people on both sides who firmly believe in it, and there will be people who are swayed between them based on
legitimate
facts.
pros and cons, like legitimate pros and cons on each side. I mean, look, I can understand, even though like there's a ton of aviation groups that don't agree with this. I mean, Congress gave the FAA $7.4 billion between 2004 and 2016 to develop and install these next-gen systems, which are supposed to replace some of the outdated radar systems and things like that the president was making fun of, making fun of our critical infrastructure. But the idea was to boost the capacity of the U.S. aviation system to handle more planes and cut flight delays and improve safety. But for the most part, airlines support, even though airlines support next gen, they're expected to, next gen is supposed to cost another $14.8 billion to complete, with many major upgrades not due to be functional until about 2025. So you're having a legitimate argument about the slowness of government versus the speed and also monopolization coming from the private sector. Like, I miss this.
It seems so normal. I have this vague recollection of 365 days ago having this exact same feeling about policy issues.
I mean, it was beyond 360. There weren't a lot of legitimate arguments in the Obama administration either. But this is a legitimate conservative versus liberal, Democrat versus Republican, like business versus government argument. This is great. I'm sorry. I'm gushing way too much over this.
Well, and it's not like, 20 million people are at risk of losing insurance or anything because of this. I mean, this is just who's going to run it, the businesses or government.
Right. Like, it's
a pretty basic argument almost.
Seriously, it's not putting a neo-Nazi in the White House or anything like that. Like, it's just privatization versus government. This is crazy. Sorry, guys. Sorry, listeners. It hit me all at once. But so one of the ways in which this does affect does affect the FAA and does affect NASA that I'm actually curious about is the unmanned aircraft system. It's called the UAS UTM. It's an unmanned aircraft system traffic management. It's a horrible abbreviation, but the idea behind this program that's headed by NASA, but also has participation from FAA and other federal agencies, is that they're collaboratively exploring concepts of operation, data exchange requirements, and a supporting framework to enable multiple beyond visual line of sight operations at low altitudes. So this is effectively going to be a traffic management ecosystem that's completely unmanned. This is what NASA and FAA have been studying for a few years now. The idea is that, like I said, airspace will be managed to enable multiple UAS operations conducted beyond visual line of sight where air traffic services are not provided. And so this gives you the ability for things like drones or smaller aircraft to monitor basically everything in the sky without the need for constant communication from a human being. With UTM, there's a cooperative interaction between operators and the FAA to determine and communicate real-time airspace status so that you don't run into things like the Malaysian air flight where all you have to go off of is a few pings and a black a black box at the end of the day. So I'll be curious to see how transition can work from programs like UAS UTM.
And so this is basically air traffic control for drones.
Yeah, basically.
It's that in the article that's included, or the website for UTM. It's basically everything between about 200 feet up and 500 feet up.
Yeah, anything that's flying low altitude, which is likely to be small aircraft, which is likely to be drones. Yeah. So basically air traffic control management for those. So you think if you have automated drone services in the future, the Domino's Pizza, you can get Domino's Pizza now if Domino's is in New York City and you live out in like Watertown, right? Like, you can actually get, but even more,
or if you live in like Eastern Washington, you're out in can't think of a city right now. You're out in the suburbs of Seattle, and right. You're like, I really want this Amazon package delivered, and it comes right to your door, which is something they're already trying to do.
Or if you live in DC, if you live all the way out in Alexandria and you want something from DC.
Well, they're not going to allow that.
Yeah, that's true. We'll never let that happen.
But this will be interesting to see. Like, so, UAS is implemented, it's the early 2020s and it's going fine. Do we then start having the conversation of, do we start to phase out human air traffic controllers if a computer can do the job better and with less error?
That will literally never happen. I cannot see that ever happen. No matter how good these things get, there's always going to be some it goes back to that whole notion of, is AI going to take over the world? Look, there's always going to be some operator, somebody that we put in place as a safety precaution. Like, we're never just going to, sort of give it all to the machines to control. So,
well, and then also there's just that cultural aspect. People don't want to do that. If it's like, oh, I'm just going to give my life to this machine and let it decide if the plane's going to crash or not. Like, no one's going to want that.
Right.
Even if those safety precautions are there, there's a certain threshold of control that people expect out of humans on the other end of the system.
Yeah.
Whether that's pizza delivery or flying an airplane or passenger rail. I mean, there's a certain expectation for the amount of human involvement.
Right. So
which could definitely change over time, but we need to leave the airspace and enter the aerospace. But so sort of as a follow-up to a topic that we've been covering on and off the last couple of weeks, Ted Cruz is in the news again. This time, maybe not for everything that he wants. So as we've talked about before, Ted Cruz has sort of been on this personal campaign against the Outer Space Treaty. Well, maybe not so much against the Outer Space Treaty, but for renegotiating, amending, or creating an entirely new treaty to surpass the authority of the Outer Space Treaty. His argument being that with the rise of commercial space, that we're going to need something beyond Article 6, which is literally like 4 sentences, something beyond Article 6 that will cover the regulatory and legal framework in which commercial space exists. This article in Space News basically says companies and lawyers argue against changing the Outer Space Treaty. And this is maybe something that I could have foreseen a little bit if I could see 3 weeks in the future. Just because, Cruz has been on this campaign for 2 months? Less than that. And it seemed as if there was an urgency to what he was saying. And I know, Newton, you and I talked about this before we're recording right now, that outer space is not a $1 trillion industry. It's hardly a couple $1 billion industry. Like it's not that big. More or less 50% or more of space is still government contracts. And even of the part that is commercial space, I would probably say 95 to 98% is telecommunications, which is very terrestrial. So when it comes to changing the Outer Space Treaty, now is not the time. I just really don't see it being a pertinent issue in the next 5-10 years. I know there's, the muskrats and the lunatics who will argue with me saying, oh no, SpaceX or Blue Origin, whoever's going to get to the moon in the next 3 years. But no.
Well, focusing on, some issue it's definitely something we could focus on 10 years from now. If only there were some global agreement or issue that we could actually focus on now as a country. Maybe, I don't know, one that's started in some place like, I don't know, Paris or something like that.
Oh, this is going to be a sad episode, isn't it?
No, but I do think that the Outer Space Treaty is something that actually needs to be addressed. I think that I think that there are a lot of people that are sort of coming out against it. Partially because no one likes Ted Cruz. I'll say it. I'll stand on that island.
Especially because it's a pretty crowded island.
Right, exactly. No one really likes Ted Cruz, so I think it's easy to come out against him. I do think that it is something that we need to address and update, given that we're approaching a space age. We have other partners that are getting, as we'll talk about later, are getting heavily involved in space. I think it's something that we will need to talk about, in the future. So
yeah, absolutely. And sort of what I'm saying is that the Outer Space Treaty, although not perfect, is a legal framework in which we can work in right now, that it gives there's enough vagueness in it that it allows us to do things like one of our upcoming topics, the space commerce law. Well, it's a bill still, but there's no urgent need to change the Outer Space Treaty tomorrow. There's no urgent need to change the Outer Space Treaty in a year. But what we do need to do is start talking about it. We need to start talking about these issues and saying, all right, we haven't asked some of these questions before. We haven't asked if someone gets a rock from the moon and brings it back, who owns it? Mostly because that's not really ever happened, that it wasn't a government function.
How quickly is he trying to push this, though?
I don't even think he has a timetable. I think he's just kind of making a fuss about it so that he can be, when people Google Outer Space Treaty, that he's the first name that pops up.
So that no one wants to do the Outer Space Treaty. I'm starting to see his game here.
Yeah. He's trying to build up a rapport within the space community and also within Texas. Texas is going to be a proving ground for space commerce. You have out in not West Texas, the city, but in Western Texas, Blue Origin's building their spaceport. You have Houston, of course, and you have a bunch of aerospace companies that are starting to get into the game of okay, maybe we can start mining asteroids and doing these things. Like, is that income then going to come to Texas, or is that going to go to Georgia, or is that going to go to Minnesota? I mean, this is sort of where we're going to start seeing the implications of the Outer Space Treaty is in how the 50 states deal with space issues and space commerce, and then it can grow to a national and then international and global scale. I don't think this is something that we need to take to the UN like next week and be like, hey, we got to renegotiate the Outer Space Treaty. I know there's this Paris thing, blah, blah, blah. I don't care. Outer Space Treaty. That's not at all what we need to be doing. And I kind of don't think that's what Cruz is saying, but that's definitely the vibe I'm getting, that he has a bit of an urgency to this. Mostly also because, he's up for re-election in 2018. But,
oh, okay. So yeah, that makes sense you bring it up.
All these things kind of they merge.
Yeah.
Some confluence at some point.
Yeah. I'm just saying, there are allies you need and there are allies you don't need.
And Ted Cruz
I'll let you guys guess which one Ted Cruz is.
Comment below with which one you think is the correct answer. Is Ted Cruz a friend or not a friend?
That's totally how we're posting this episode.
I already see the Twitter, the tweet that we're going to put out. It's going to be like, this week's episode, nobody likes Ted Cruz at Ted Cruz.
All right.
So, all right, let's keep trucking on through this latest from Washington. So there were 3 hearings last week, 2 on the NASA budget for fiscal year 2018, one in the subcommittee on space within the House Science Committee, and the other one was within the House Appropriations Subcommittee, CJS, Commerce, Justice, Science, and Related Agencies. So just for those who don't know, the first committee that I mentioned, the Space Subcommittee, deals with all of the authorizations, meaning the things that Congress tells NASA to do. And the latter committee that I brought up, the House Appropriations Committee, is the committee that holds the purse strings and says, okay, here's how much money we're going to give NASA to do that. So the 2 totally different committees with 2 totally different agendas. The House Science Committee, they sort of, they marked up the NASA budget for FY 2018 just sort of as a show of, this is where our priorities lie. They don't really have any jurisdiction over anything within the appropriation. CJS does. But so there, both of the hearings were fairly interesting. The videos are online. There's links in last week's show notes and this week's show notes. Basically, the overview is that everyone sort of agrees that NASA is important to the future of the country, that this budget is not the best right now, but it can be made a little bit better. But some of the things that it does, like cutting the Office of Education and cutting some Earth science programs, are supported on one side and rejected on the other. You can guess which side is which. So both of those committee hearings were pretty non-explosive, other than a few members of Congress bringing up the cut Earth science missions in the Office of Education. Did you watch any of the committee proceedings, or were you busy having a life?
I was busy working because I had a major deadline last week. No, but I mean, I recognize the importance of these hearings, and I can't wait to read about the the actual budget they put out. Yeah.
Another thing that I'm looking at Jeff Faust's Twitter, of course. He does a great, make sure you follow him at Jeff_Faust, does a great sort of wrap up for all of these so you can just sort of follow along if you're at work and can't really pay attention to a full committee hearing. But I mean, they brought up Deep Space Gateway. This is like the official sort of congressional announcement of Deep Space Gateway as being the next step on this on the trip to Mars. There was some talk on whether it's just a smaller version of ISS, which Administrator Lightfoot said it is a lot smaller. And there was just some talk about, what are we on track for Mars? And of course, bring up Deep Space Gateway. Administrator Lightfoot gave a thumbs up. So
One would hope he would, given that it happened.
One would definitely hope he would.
During his, administratorship.
It's not. It's okay. Yeah. It's bad. Yeah. Sad. But so, I guess maybe the last thing in latest from Washington is the House committee's review, the Science Committee, the Authorization Committee that I talked about earlier, had a hearing on the American Space Commerce Free Enterprise Act, which it sort of tries to do what Ted Cruz is, I guess, trying to do, is start to have that conversation about where the Outer Space Treaty falters and where there's holes within the American regulatory regime, and where within those holes industry can then sort of start exploring the options. It doesn't really, so the Space Commerce Act is what I'll call it, doesn't really fill the holes so much as it sort of points them out and says, there's some ambiguity here with the Outer Space Treaty. Let's sort of allow industry to fill that void, because the United States government is ultimately responsible to the international community for actions by United States-based companies. Let the companies sort of explore these options and develop these technologies in a regulatory regime that's not restrictive yet. And so that is, I mean, the
that's
Science
an
Committee
interesting
was
stance to take.
Yeah, it is. It's very like, hey, there's all these holes in the law, exploit them. See where find the weak points.
Particularly when the Outer Space Treaty says, if these people mess up in space and they're from your country, it's your fault.
Yeah, I mean, the United States, if
to summarize the Outer Space Treaty, guys,
if SpaceX sends up a Falcon 9 and it destroys like every geostationary satellite somehow, the United States is liable.
It's the United States' fault.
Yeah.
Okay.
So what this does is it gives the Department of Commerce oversight over this regulatory regime. I mean, it gives them the power to say, okay, this is where you can create more regulations. This is where you create more oversight. This is where you create, working groups and committees to figure out these problems. Ultimately giving the decision-making power to the Secretary of Commerce, which is a first for space. Yeah.
Nothing against the Secretary of Commerce, but get ready to deal with all sorts of export-import laws.
Yes. Well, I mean, space already has to deal with a lot of those
They
things.
do, but there are some interesting things that happen in the Department of Commerce, where the restrictions and regulations are a bit more stringent. And it'll be interesting to see how a lot of American companies react to having to deal with those regulations.
Mm-hmm. There were also a few amendments that were made to the draft legislation that will be linked down in the show notes. One of which, from Jim Bridenstine of Oklahoma, the supposed next NASA administrator, basically directs the Government Accountability Office to look at what the impact would be on moving FAA AST. So the FAA's Office of Commercial Space Transportation. Why it's called AST, no one really knows. But it's FAA AST. Moving that from FAA, this office has a budget of about $20 million. That's million with an M. And moving it under a independent office of the Secretary of Transportation, upping its profile and potentially upping the amount of money that it can start getting every year, so that it's not stuck within sort of fighting for resources with the rest of FAA. And the other amendment would create an advisory group, a space advisory group, probably made up of the executives of top aerospace companies, to start having conversations with the Department of Transportation and Department of Commerce and NASA and the administration to talk about next steps. So overall, if the Space Commerce Act passes, I think that'll be a good next step. It can lay a nice foundation onto which we can build later on. It doesn't really create any nasty precedents that we'd have to worry about impacting space commerce. I mean, because I think everyone in the field agrees that space commerce is that should be the next step in making space real is monetizing it. I mean, it's making sure that people remain invested, because if they don't invest in space, they lose out. Almost
right.
It's
an
almost creating
economy
FOMO
in
for space.
Yeah. There's a lot of FOMO from space already, but yeah, it's a good idea to have an entire space economy. I don't see us being in danger of not, but yeah.
Well, and then it also brings in the international aspect. If the United States has a Space Commerce Act on the books, that makes us a lot more competitive to companies in other places who are like, I wonder if we should open up a Washington D.C. office, or if we want to open up a manufacturing facility in Iowa. I think this creates an incentive for those international corporations to invest in space here.
Yeah, absolutely. So, moving right along to the space news highlight of the week. This was the big news all week. The newest class of 2017 astronaut candidates were announced June 7th. So I've had a lot of people ask me, just what the term astronaut candidate means. And really it just refers to people who've been selected by NASA as just candidates and are going as just candidates for the NASA Astronaut Corps and are currently undergoing a candidacy training program at the Johnson Space Center. We all hope that they'll all go to space someday, but becoming an astronaut candidate doesn't necessarily guarantee that you will become, a full-fledged astronaut, which would require you going to space. But like I said, we hope that each of these folks will actually make it up there one day. And this, I mean, I don't know if you saw this lineup, but this has to be one of NASA's most diverse lineups for the astronaut candidate. And not just diverse in terms of men and women. There appear to be 5 women, 7 men on here, and not just diverse in terms of people of color. Although it really is. This class of astronauts includes 6 military officers, okay, normal, but 2 of them are doctors. It includes a marine biologist who's involved in Antarctic expeditions, a geologist who's worked with NASA Mars Curiosity rover, and a SpaceX engineer who might ride a rocket that he helped design, which is kind of cool, right? Just to give you, I'll just rattle off the full list of the astronaut candidates. There's Kayla Barron. She's 29 years old. She's a lieutenant in the U.S. Navy, and she's from Richland, Washington. And she was a member of the first class of women in the submarine warcraft community. There's Zena Cardman. She's 29. She's a graduate research fellow at Penn State from Williamsburg, Virginia. She studies marine sciences on a National Science Foundation grant, and she's worked at NASA before as a researcher on some of their missions. There's Raja Shari. He's 39 years old. He's a lieutenant colonel in the U.S. Air Force from Cedar Falls, Iowa. He directs the F-35 Integrated Test Force, which has been involved in developing the new stealth fighter for U.S. military use. There's Matthew Dominic. He's 35. He's a lieutenant commander in the U.S. Navy from Wheat Ridge, Colorado. Recently, he's been in Japan and at sea on board the USS Ronald Reagan in the Western Pacific. There's Bob Hines. He's 42. I think he's the oldest one in the bunch.
He is.
Yes, he is. He's a research pilot at the NASA Johnson Space Center, and he's from Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. A lot of PA representation here. He's already been at NASA for about 5 years, and that's after serving in the Air Force and Air Force Reserves for 18 years. Just a few more. There's Woody Hoberg. He's 31. He's an assistant professor at MIT from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Prior to leading his research group at MIT, he was a private pilot with wilderness search and rescue experience. Johnny Kim, I believe he's the only Asian American in the bunch. He's a resident physician at Massachusetts General Hospital, and he's from LA.
He was a Navy SEAL.
He was a freaking Navy SEAL, and he earned a silver and bronze star while being a Navy SEAL. And then he decided that wasn't difficult enough, so he got a math degree and then went to Harvard Medical School. Rob Cullen, this person's 33. He's a launch chief engineer for SpaceX. He's from Anchorage, Alaska, which I don't know if this is actually this might be their first astronaut from Alaska.
Comment below if we're wrong.
Comment below if we're wrong. Rate us 5 stars and then leave a comment if we're wrong. Before he came to SpaceX, he was, he had some odd jobs. He was a commercial fisherman in Alaska. He was an ice driller in Antarctica, which I guess those aren't that odd for where he's from.
Wait, ice driller. I'm getting an Armageddon flashback.
Yeah. We're going to teach the drillers how to astronaut. Just about 4 more. There's Jasmine Mogbelli. She's 33. She's a major in the U.S. Marine Corps, and she's from Baldwin, New York. She's the only incoming astronaut from the Marine Corps, and she's currently testing H-1 helicopters. There's Laurel O'Hara, 34. He's a research engineer at Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution from Sugar Land, Texas. She previously worked with NASA as a student at the KC-135 Reduced Gravity Student Flight Opportunity Program, and apparently NASA Academy and at JPL. There's Frank Rubio, 41, the second oldest. He's a major in the U.S. Army from Miami, Florida. He served as a Black Hawk helicopter pilot and as a surgeon. And finally, there's Jessica Watkins. I believe she's the only Black woman on this new class of astronauts. She's a postdoctoral fellow at the California Institute of Technology from Lafayette, Colorado. She's worked on Mars-related projects with NASA in the past, and as she says, she said in her own words, we hope to send her to Mars one day. So
I just want a selfie of Jessica Watkins with Curiosity, the robot she worked on.
You know what? Of all the people who could have beat me out for the astronaut candidate positions, I'm glad it's them.
Yeah. My description on here it'd be like a sentence. It'd be like, he went to school at American University. Yeah. And we just sort of picked him.
This guy's like, I was a Navy SEAL, and I thought that wasn't that difficult. Got 2 medals, and so I just went to go study math and go to Harvard
and then got bored with that and went to med school, and then got bored with that and became an astronaut.
God. Maybe next time.
I do like seeing the diversity here in background. I mean, it's like, like you said, there's 6 of them that were in the military, and the other 6 are from such diverse backgrounds. I mean, even of the ones that were in the military, you have doctors and scientists. This is not your grandfather's astronaut corps.
No doubt. And
this is surprisingly, I don't know if I want to say surprisingly diverse. It's as diverse as I've really wanted it to be in terms of background and skill. And I think this is a great first step in laying that foundation, that excitement about going to Mars. I mean, because literally every single one of these people has had the conversation with people in their lives and the news media about, are you going to Mars? I mean, that's what we were, asking John Glenn back in 1961. I mean, you're going to the moon, right? It's like, I mean, these could very well, I mean, these aren't John Glenn didn't get to go, but these very well could be the first people to walk on the Martian surface.
It's crazy. It's crazy to think about. So once again, these people were picked out of a pool of 18,300 applicants, where the most recent, the second highest group was about 8,000 applicants. I believe that was back in 1979. NASA's now selected a total of 350 astronauts since the original Mercury 7 in 1959. So this group of 12 is joining, quite the legacy, and they're going to be a part of quite the lineage of brave men and women who've gone to space and chosen to do that adventure to find, to explore, to achieve new science for the human race. It's really a great thing. So.
And something that I noticed in this since last Wednesday was the announcement is, you'd expect me and Newton to, if not know these people, but to be like, 2 degrees of separation from them. And I am for a couple of them, and not for reasons. I know some of these people through people who aren't in the space field. That's sort of telling me that this is why this pick is so great, is that at some point or another, everyone's going to know every single one of these names, or at least one of them, because they know someone who knows someone that knows them. I mean, these are people who are not just, awesome at what they do and heroic in almost every aspect of their lives, but they're involved in their communities and they know people and they're engaged with their roots and the people they grew up with. I think we got a kick-ass astronaut corps.
Yeah, I think so. Oh, yeah. According to this article, NASA, it's the largest group since 2000. They say had 8,000 in 2000.
Okay, 8,000 in 2000. Yeah. We'll remember that.
Yeah.
So congratulations to the new class of astronauts.
Congrats, guys.
International
news. Go ahead.
So COPUOS, the UN Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space, met. They're actually still meeting this week. So it was last week and this week. COPUOS is meeting in Vienna, Austria, to discuss issues facing them for the next year. They are working on a myriad of issues, and we actually will hopefully have someone on the podcast soon enough who is at COPUOS. I mean, they're talking about everything from planetary protection, protecting other planets from our own contamination, to planetary defense, protecting our Earth from that, as well as some of these, I guess, legal and commercial questions. I mean, it's the peaceful uses of outer space. They're talking about how can we coexist in space with not just, the Russians and the Chinese, but also commercial entities, and how can we keep the peace and not turn it into the Wild West. So stay tuned in the next couple of weeks to hear more about this meeting in Austria.
Sounds good.
All right, and you have some information about India, the ISRO, the Indian Space Research Organization.
Yeah, so India apparently has launched their biggest rocket yet. So this was on June 5th, they successfully launched a 43 meter, that's 140 foot for our American audience, rocket into a clear sky at about 5:28 a.m. off of one of India's southern islands. This is a big move on behalf of the Indian Space Agency. It's the largest rocket that they've ever launched, and the rocket's main cargo was a satellite weighing more than 3 tons into a high orbit above Earth. This was the heaviest payload that they've ever sent into space. So they're currently thinking about missions to Jupiter and Venus, and this is sort of a stepping stone on their way to getting there. So congrats, India.
Yeah, I mean, this is something very interesting. I mean, it's been many years in the making, India's space economy. Actually, they're trying to get more and more involved. We talk very often about Russia and China. We talked a couple weeks ago about the UAE. We're talking about these very high-profile countries that are kind of always in the news, but not so much about India. I mean, India's in the news a lot, but maybe not for space and science. We often look at India almost derogatorily, or talked about derogatorily in the media for there was a problem with manufacturing there and 600 people died or whatever down that line. It's good to see some good news out of India, and they have a really big blossoming space economy growing there. I mean, if you think about it, a lot of telecommunications companies have offices and manufacturing sites in India. Why not bring the launch providers to them?
Right, and it was only a matter of time before some of the technological boom sort of reached India to the point where they could have a sort of a bustling space agency like this. I'm not saying it's on the level of NASA or maybe even ESA, but I mean, they're like I said, they're thinking of going to Jupiter and they're thinking of going to Venus. Those are not inexpensive missions.
Yeah.
So,
and I mean, going back to what I was saying, I mean, I was saying, telecommunication companies are there. Yeah, they're not just talking about the commercial aspect of space. They're not talking about telecommunications. They're talking about ISRO is talking about missions to Jupiter and Venus. I mean, they could very well be contributing to missions to Europa or contributing to missions, for missions to an asteroid or to Mars. I mean, very well, Made in India could be written on the side of some component on the spacecraft, so that you have this is what could make this a worldwide effort if we help burgeoning economies like this.
Yeah, absolutely. Looking forward to it. So in our last bit of international news, China quietly replaced its space agency administrator. They've appointed the China National Space Administration has appointed a new administrator as the country is continuing to become an increasingly influential player in space. Tang Denhi is an economic engineer and formerly vice mayor of Shanghai municipality with no apparent aerospace background at all. But I mean, you're an administrator. It's just much like the U.S., it's a highly political position. So I do not expect Jim Bridenstine to be doing anything with building the rockets. Yes, please do not let Jim Bridenstine build the rocket. And apparently he's already met with the European Space Agency's Director General, Johann Dietrich Werner. Both of them reaffirming their commitment to the China-Europe Joint Commission on Space Cooperation. China and ESA they've been cooperating on space missions since their initial collaboration on the Double Star project back in 2003 and 2004. And they're continuing to support each other now. It'll be interesting to see what missions they'll be on in the future. So.
Yeah. And
good luck to Mr. Tang.
Yeah. I mean, it'll also be interesting to see what impact this is going to have on Chinese aspirations in space. I mean, this is someone with very little space knowledge to begin with. I mean, the previous administrator had at least some experience in the aerospace industry, whereas Tang does not. But who knows? That could actually be a good thing. It could bolster that small economy that they have now and turn it into a medium-sized economy.
But if he's vice mayor of Shanghai, that gives him at least some political experience. Obviously, not at the equivalent of the Chinese federal level, but it gives him enough political clout to be able to make decisions and move around within the agency.
Yeah, which is good.
All right, so. Latest in tech, NASA's going to set a fire in space. It's not the first time that they've done it.
It's not the second time.
It's not the second time that they've done it. They're doing it for a third time. This is about the Sapphire 3. Back on June 4th, that's not this past Sunday, but the previous Sunday, ground controllers ignited the third in a 3-part series of spacecraft fire experiments known as the Sapphire 3. The fire was set inside an Earth orbiting cargo spacecraft that's filled with trash and disposable items from the International Space Station. It's literally a space dumpster fire. The flame. Unlike there's an outer space treaty joke in there somewhere.
Okay, calm down, Ted Cruz. Calm down, Ted Cruz.
I'm saying if Ted Cruz authored the outer space treaty. But The flame spread across a 3.28 foot long sample of cotton fiberglass fabric. And this is the final test in the first phase of a series of experiments designed to investigate large-scale flame growth and material flammability limits in long-duration microgravity. And the reason that they're doing this is that understanding how fire spreads in a microgravity environment is critical to the safety of astronauts. Results will help ensure astronaut safety for longer duration deep space exploration missions. So this is really a test for that. What if a component of a ship gets set on fire? How can it spread? In what ways can it spread? How far can it spread? Things like that. So basically the craft called Cygnus left the space station, and it moved into a stable orbit where engineers at NASA Glenn in Ohio were able to begin a 2.5-hour experiment. And the experiment burned for approximately 20 minutes inside the vessel, which mimics the space station's oxygen concentration levels. Cygnus then spent the next several days downlinking the experiment data before it began a fiery plummet into the Earth's atmosphere. So this is an experiment that they're going to continue to conduct. Understanding the way that fire spreads in space is, like I said, extremely important to astronaut safety overall, to assessing even unmanned spacecraft. Understanding how fire can spread in larger unmanned spacecraft can help those spacecraft in the long run, either by placing specific sensors or AI mechanisms in there to sort of boot off components once we know that fire is going to spread to certain critical systems. So,
it's good to know how that stuff is going to work, or how it's not going to work under extreme circumstances. I mean, that's something maybe we don't think about here on Earth because we've lived with fire for, a couple 100,000 years. Up in space, we haven't really ever had to deal with fire as an issue. And this helps us lay down that groundwork for future understanding of the risks of going into space. This is another thing about it is we don't necessarily need the justification of saying, we need to know this because we're going to Mars. This is just something that's good to know. How is a fire going to spread in your spacecraft, whether you're in low Earth orbit or, a trans-Martian orbit? It's good to know what's going on when the fire starts.
Absolutely. So moving on from intentional fires in space to intentional fires on Earth. The U.S. Missile Defense Agency's ground-based defense system was successfully able to intercept an intercontinental ballistic missile during the first live fire test of its kind last Tuesday.
For anyone not in the know, don't think that someone actually shot an ICBM at us. It was a test.
It was totally a test. It was just a demonstration to show that the U.S. has the ability to shoot down any incoming missiles launched from North Korea. The ground-based mid-course defense, or GMD, is actually designed to intercept and destroy missiles during the mid-course of their trajectory through space. So that test was the first time the system had any sort of live fire ICBM class test. The ICBM test target was actually launched from the Reagan test site on the Kwajalein Atoll in the Marshall Islands, according to the MDA. The radar in the Pacific tracked and targeted the launch, as did multiple sensors, which sounds like they can't even talk about, which would most likely include the Air Force's main missile warning satellite constellation, the space-based infrared system. So using the combination of data from those satellites as well as radar, they were able to track the missile and intercept the missile. What's interesting is the test came just 2 days after Pyongyang fired a short-range ballistic missile that traveled about 248 miles and splashed down in Japan's exclusive economic zone. Our great leader, President Trump, then released the following statement. North Korea has shown great disrespect for their neighbor, China, by shooting off yet another ballistic missile, but China is trying hard. That was his statement.
That's a great statement. I'm going to completely disregard that statement and explain how this works. So, of the tech stuff I do know, this is one of the things. So, you were talking about how this is a mid-course defense system. So, that is the hardest place for us to intercept the missile like this. So if people don't know how an ICBM works, it's almost the same as as like sending a satellite up, except it doesn't go as high up. So you launch it on a rocket, generally similar to the same ones that we use to send things into space, just with a little less fuel and a little bit more of an angle to it in the direction that you're going. Once it reaches a certain altitude, the second stage, the actual warhead, disconnects from the rest of the craft and is floats through space a little bit in the upper atmosphere and then comes down on its target. A lot of warheads or a lot of nuclear tipped ICBMs have multiple warheads on them. So it's not like you're just launching one and it's going to hit one city. You would launch one and it would hit like 18, depending on the makeup of the nuclear weapon. So back to the mid-course defense, the GMD. So early on in the launch sequence of an ICBM, it's very easy to detect because the background heat is constant. I mean, it's Earth temperature. Or if you're looking at it from certain angles, it's the sky. I mean, it's easy to detect something with infrared if it's really hot against a really cold background or a relatively cold background. When the warhead is entering towards your city or town or military installation, it's also very easy to detect, except you don't have as much time to react to it. And that's what the THAAD system is for really rapid response. When it's a really hot object you can see burning up into the atmosphere heading towards you, sending a THAAD up there, a kinetic connection basically is made and destroys the warhead. Mid-course is the most difficult because in space, the rocket or the warhead has cooled off. It was in a casing on the way up, and now it's not. And it's sort of floating. It's a cold object against a cold background. Very hard to detect. But that is the mid-course is the longest period in the life cycle of an ICBM launch. So the beginning, the first part of the launch, the early course, is very rapid, and the end course is very rapid. The mid course is the longest portion of that and would be the most optimal time to knock it out of the sky because it's you have the most opportunities to do so. And so what the GMD proved was that is possible, that we have the technology to recognize a cold object in space against an extremely cold background.
Right, and to the best of my understanding, the actual the missile that we're using to intercept the missile, it actually destroys it purely through the actual force of the collision of the actual collision. It's a kinetic kill weapon. Yeah, that just wanted to kind of clarify what you meant by kinetic.
Okay.
Which means it requires a significant amount of precision because you're effectively just firing a bullet at a missile that's very high up and moving very fast.
So you're firing a bullet at a slightly larger bullet.
Yes. So yeah, no, it's a great capability to have, and we'll see. Well, I guess we won't see. Probably never know.
Hopefully, we will never have to use this ever again in the future.
Yeah.
But as Mike Rogers says in the Space News article, that this is this successful test will help deter U.S. adversaries. pointing a finger specifically at North Korea, because that's one of the hot zones, I guess, from the MDA's perspective, or even from the U.S. government perspective, making sure North Korea knows that we can shoot down anything they send our way.
Right. So, all right, moving on to coming soon to space. NASA will be hosting another briefing on, guess what? Exoplanets.
Everyone's favorite topic.
Everyone's favorite. I never actually get bored from hearing about exoplanets. Like, I get a little bored from hearing about the next Falcon 9 launch, but exoplanets.
Elon, you're boring us. Give us exoplanets.
Seriously. So they're going to hold a media briefing at 11 a.m. next Monday, June 19th, to announce the latest planet candidate results from the exoplanet hunting Kepler mission. The briefing is going to take place at the Kepler Science Conference and will be held at NASA Ames Research Center in California's Silicon Valley. So I can't wait to hear about that.
Yeah, make sure you tune in next Monday at 10
a.m.
So
that's next Monday. Jack, anything going on this weekend?
Oh, this weekend. Actually, can I bring up one little exoplanet thing real quick?
Sure. All right, yeah.
So I talked to Tom about this. This is the first time I'm telling you. So I was playing this game Stellaris. We talked about it last week when we were talking about that Paradox game, the one about Mars colonization. So I was playing Stellaris. And I was playing as my spacefaring monkeys. And I found I was surveying a system, and the name that popped up was TRAPPIST. And I was like, oh, that's kind of funny because so they do use some real life system. So you can be on the Sol system, and the closest star to that is going to be Alpha Centauri, and there'll be, Betelgeuse will be a red giant. Like, things are pretty accurate if you're playing on that mode. And I went and I looked, and the TRAPPIST system in the game has 7 planets, and 3 of them are partially habitable. So it's like, they actually did it. They put it in the game.
That's freaking awesome. Freaking awesome.
I took a screenshot. We'll use it for the episode image. But very cool. So this weekend, so for those of you listening on Wednesday, starting in 2 days on Friday is AwesomeCon. You better come to this, because AwesomeCon is, for lack of a better term, awesome. So AwesomeCon is awesome. It's the Comic-Con of the DC area. It is.
But it's not really a Comic-Con. It's a Comic-Con that there are comics there.
Yeah, it's the affiliate of Comic-Con, but that doesn't mean that it's only comics. And it's not only movies, like a lot of Comic-Cons are. Like, there is so much science and tech and innovation there. It blew my mind last year, because last year was my first time going. When we had a table there, which we also have a table there with the Planetary Society, booth 505. Come see us. But AwesomeCon it's this awesome display of science and tech, and the whole nonprofit section that we were in last year and we're in this year. It takes up a pretty sizable amount of the conference. I would say even like maybe a 10th of the entire conference, the entire con, is just science and tech stuff. And it's really freaking cool.
What they're actually doing this year is they're going to have an event called FutureCon. They're calling it a con inside of a con. Like, it's the first year that they're debuting it. So last year, one of the interesting things that they did is, they have entire blocks of different events that are going on within the con. So you have your comic book writers panel block, and you have your sci-fi TV block where you'll see people from Star Trek or Star Wars, right? And last year, one of the interesting things that they did was they had an entire science block where Department of Energy, NASA, just a bunch of different science related groups They did panels. They had entire sections like you just talked about that were out in the main area with all of the booths. They really dedicated an entire area to science. And this year, what they're actually doing is they're debuting what they call FutureCon. They really wanted to highlight science even more within the con. So FutureCon is a 3-day science, technology, and entertainment celebration that's held within AwesomeCon. So you don't have to get a different badge or some sort of special badge for it, but they just wanted to make sure that they highlighted exactly where where all of the science was within the con. And the kickoff event is actually going to be hosted by Colonel Chris Hadfield, the famous astronaut from the International Space Station, and a pretty regular host of Star Talk Live. And he's actually going to be hosting a special edition of Star Talk Live at AwesomeCon. So it's going to be awesome. Definitely go.
I don't think that they could have come up with a better name for this event. I mean, because it really is going to be awesome. Every year, or last year at least, was just so cool. I'm not the biggest comic book person. I'm not the biggest movie person or TV show person. Like I'll see the big things. I'll see Star Wars. I'll see. I still need to see Wonder Woman, but I mean, I'll see all the big hype stuff. You didn't just say that. I'll see all the big hype stuff because I like to stay informed and not be like left in the dust. But to see that integrated into all of this pretty mainstream pop culture, that science had a was right next to all of this real science was right next to all of it, where people who had their Captain America t-shirts on and or were cosplaying as Spider-Man or whatever could then stop by and see something about exoplanets and learn. I just think that was like the coolest thing.
Here's a list of just some of the talks that are going to be going on at FutureCon. This is just some of them. There's Cassini's spectacular grand finale at Saturn. I didn't see anything that said Caroline Porco would be there, but who knows?
You never know.
She pops her head up everywhere. Parallel and multi-universe theory and sci-fi. Mars, past, present, and future. Harry Potter and the genetics of wizarding. Antarctic dinosaurs, and space lasers, because why not?
Well, of course, we're going to be talking about space lasers.
I mean, why wouldn't you talk about space lasers? One of the biggest guests that are going to be there, as I said, were Colonel Chris Hadfield, Grant Tremblay, John Mather, Matt Schindel, Mark Tierlink, Scott Adsit, and Seth Shostak. So make sure to come on down to AwesomeCon. It's held in Washington, D.C. at the Walter Washington Convention Center in Mount Vernon Square, June 16th through 18th. Buy your tickets now.
Yeah, just some hours for you. It's from noon to 8 on Friday the 16th, 10 to 7 on the 17th, and 10 to 5 on the 18th. So you have plenty of hours to make it down and come to booth 505 and see your favorite hosts of your favorite space podcast at Astra. So that's all I got for this week, Newton.
That's all for me too. So I hope to see you guys next weekend.
Yes, I will for sure see everyone next weekend. Don't prove me wrong. All right. As always, I'm Jack.
And I'm Newton
at Astra.